Step up here, face the judge, you're going to raise your right hand.
Do you swear or affirm under penalty of law that the testimony you'll give in this case will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
All right, thank you. Have a seat, talk into the microphone.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
How are you doing today?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Great. Would you please state your name for the record?
My name is Robert Gillette, last name spelled Gillettete.
And where are you currently employed?
I am employed by the Federal Bureau of Investigation within the Explosives Unit, which is part of the Laboratory Division.
And how long have you worked for the FBI?
I started with the FBI in 2009 as a contractor. I was hired on as an employee in 2012.
And what's your official title?
My official title is Chemist Forensic Examiner.
And how long have you been working as a chemist forensic examiner?
For about 11 years now.
All right. Can you give us a brief wrap-up of your educational background?
I have a Bachelor of Science and a Master of Science in Chemistry from George Mason University. It's in Fairfax, Virginia.
And do you have any training and experience in chemist forensic examination?
Specifically, to become a qualified chemist forensic examiner, I had to complete a training program. That training program started with supervised casework, so casework where supervised either chemists or chemistry examiners oversaw my actions. It included knowledge checks on the different types of instruments that I used, and then competency tests for all of the different procedures that we had. So,
go ahead.
After that, I had to successfully complete multiple oral boards of examinations in topics that covered explosives, the chemistry of explosives, as well as the different analytical techniques that we use in the laboratory. And then after that came 2 different moot court exercises that I had to successfully complete, as well as supervised case reporting. And then I was a qualified chemist forensic examiner.
Have you ever been recognized by a court as an expert in this field in the past?
Yes, I have.
Great. At this time, Your Honor, I'd move the court to recognize Mr. Gillette as an expert witness in the field of chemical forensic examination.
No objection.
All right, an expert in chemical forensic examination.
That's it. All right. Mr. Gillette, how did you become involved in this case?
For this case, I was asked to perform explosives chemistry examinations on what were suspected to be ammunition propellant samples.
And what sort of testing were you asked to perform?
Well, that was it, the explosives chemistry examinations.
Can you describe exactly what that testing is?
Yes, it starts with a visual examination, literally looking at what we have to determine where it's going to fit within the different procedures that we have for examining explosives or materials used to make explosives. After that visual examination, it'll point me towards a specific procedure, and in this case, they ended up being what's known as, or they appeared to be, what's called smokeless powders. It's a type of ammunition propellant. So we have a technical procedure specifically for that, and the first step is visual examination. So I continued my visual examination and used a microscope to look at the specific particles under a microscope, but also to take photographs and make measurements, because that's part of our examination. After the visual examination came what's called a solvent extraction, literally using a liquid to ideally extract out the components of those individual particles so that they could be analyzed. And then I analyzed that solvent, that liquid, using an instrument called a gas chromatograph coupled to a mass spectrometer. A chromatograph is an instrument that simply, or ideally, separates out a mixture into its individual components so that each individual component can be identified, detected and identified, and that's what the mass spectrometer does. And after that, those samples, after they had been extracted by the solvent, they were analyzed using a technique called Fourier transform infrared spectroscopy. And spectroscopy techniques, or spectroscopic techniques, are just techniques where you have a known amount of energy that interacts with the sample, and those interactions can give information as to the specific, either the elements contained within the sample, or how those elements are bound to one another to give molecular, so structural information. And then the last step is a technique called a thermal susceptibility test. That's literally taking a small amount of material, introducing heat in the form of flame, and then seeing how it reacts.
Thank you. Mr. Gillette, did you take any photographs as part of your examination in this case?
Yes, I took multiple photographs using one of our microscopes.
Great. Your Honor, may I approach the witness?
Yes.
Mr. Gillette, would you please look at these two photographs and tell me if these are photographs that you took as part of your laboratory testing?
Yes, I took both of the photographs.
Great. Your Honor, Mr. Bowles and I have stipulated to the admission of States Exhibits 111A and 111B. May I move for entry of those and request to publish?
Yes.
Thank you.
I'll admit them. Go ahead and publish.
All right. Mr. Gillette, let's start with this image. Now I'll zoom out a little bit. Are you able to see that on your monitor?
Not at the moment, no.
Okay. Let's fix that.
No. Oh, there it is.
All right. Mr. Gillette, did you take this photograph?
Yes, I did.
And what is this a photograph of?
This is a photograph of a handful of the particles from item 4.
All right. When you say item 4, can you explain what item 4 is?
Item 4 is one of the samples that I received with respect to this case.
What was the form of item 4?
What do you mean by form?
Was it a cartridge of live ammunition?
It was a disassembled cartridge. I don't recall specifically every single component within the container that contained item 4, but I was focused on the suspected ammunition propellant.
Great. And did you examine some other items that had a smokeless powder that looked just like this?
Yes, I did.
And what were those items?
Those would have been items 4 through 7, and there was a 5th one. I don't recall the item number.
Would it help you refresh your recollection if you look at your report?
Yes, it would.
Please take a look at your report.
Okay.
Do you now know what the 5th item was?
Yes, it was item 13-1.
All right. And do you know where these items were sourced from?
Specifically, I don't recall the sources for every single item, but it was either from a cart, a bandolier, a holster, and I believe a tray.
Okay. And all 5 of these items, they have this identical smokeless powder composition in them. Is that correct?
Well, they have this physical appearance.
Right.
And the shape and size and color.
Okay, great. Now I'd like to show you what has been marked as States Exhibit 111B. What can you tell me about this photograph?
This is another photograph I took using a microscope. This is item 24-1.
All right, and what does this picture show?
The appearance and the physical characteristics, what we call the morphology, the shape, size, color of this specific powder.
And did you examine more than one item that had this type of powder?
Yes, I did. There were 6 that had this morphology.
And do you know what the source of those 6 items was?
The source?
Where they were found?
Is, I recall in one of the laboratory examination requests that received, the source wasn't specifically a location for 2 of them. It was a name, and then the others had a street address in Albuquerque.
Do you recall what the name was?
I believe the name was Seth Kenny.
And do you recall the address?
The specific address, no, I think it was Monroe Street in Albuquerque.
Okay, great. What I'd like to do now, and before I do this, all 6 of the cartridges that or the disassembled cartridges that were either identified as coming from Seth Kenny or from the Monroe Street address have smokeless powder that looks like this. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
All right. now I'd like to put these kind of side to side. And if you can, I know that it's kind of obvious, but could you explain to the jurors kind of what some of the visual differences between these two different types of smokeless powders are?
They both have generically the same shape. We would call that disc-shaped. However, the ones on the left are slightly smaller and they're darker in color. The ones on the right are slightly larger and have a single perforation.
Great. Aside from their visual appearance, did you conduct any testing to see if they were different chemically?
Yes, I conducted the explosives chemistry examinations that identified them both as smokeless powders but with different chemical constituents.
And for those on the left, what were your conclusions?
The items on the left were identified as a double base smokeless powder,
And for the right?
a single base smokeless powder. They were both disc shaped, but the ones on the right were obviously they had a single perforation.
All right. And what sort of conclusions are you able to draw from both the visual analysis and your chemical analysis between these two different types of smokeless powders?
Between the two, they are both physically and chemically different from one another.
All right. Is it fair to say that these probably came from two different manufacturers?
Oh, I couldn't say that because one manufacturer might make a whole bunch of different types of smokeless powder.
Sure. Understandable. All right. I'll pass the witness.
Cross-exam.
Good afternoon, Mr. Gillette.
Good afternoon.
So the number of items you tested in this case, that was 11 different items, right?
Correct.
Okay. And these items that you tested were all cartridges that were given to you by Santa Fe, by law enforcement, right?
No, specifically, I didn't test any cartridges. It was the suspected ammunition propellant.
But you received cartridges.
Yes, I did.
And your role in this was not to make sure that, I guess what I'm trying to say is you had no role in selecting which cartridges or which powders you were going to test, right? You tested what they gave you.
Correct.
And you received, is it true, it's the form you received them in was 11 Ziploc bags, right?
Yes, I believe they were Zipperlock style bags.
And each of the bags had a bullet, a casing, and a screw top container with some powder in it. Is that right?
I believe that's what it was.
So then when you received these items, these cartridges, they weren't intact.
That is correct. They were not intact.
The powder was already removed out.
That is correct.
And do you know who removed the powder out?
No, I do not.
Okay. Now, FBI laboratory, that's where you said you worked on direct. Are you aware of a Mr. Ziegler that works in the FBI laboratory as well?
Yes, Bryce Ziegler was the assigned examiner in the firearms and tool marks unit.
Okay. And was he the one who had these items prior to you testing them?
I believe so, yes.
And you don't know if Mr. Ziegler is the one that removed the powder or if somebody else removed the powder?
I'm not certain that it was Mr. Ziegler. I would assume that it was him.
Okay. So you can't say if the powder from these cartridges was all of it there, or if it was just part of the powder from the cartridges, if it was just a sampling. You don't have no way of knowing that, right?
No, I do not.
So you don't know if the powder actually came, in addition, you don't know if the powder actually came from the particular cartridge that it was in parts in the Ziploc either. It could have come from a different one.
Well, since I didn't disassemble them specifically, no, I can't say where they specifically came from.
Right. And your testing, you talked about the source of the 11 items you got being part of them from an individual named Seth Kinney, right?
Correct, yes.
Hey.
I should say that's what was on one of the communications that we got.
It's also on your report, right? Or is it not on your report?
I don't recall it being on the report.
So do you have any idea where Seth Kinney got these rounds from?
No.
Do you know how it is that Seth Kinney selected these specific rounds to provide to law enforcement to provide to you?
I don't know that he even provided them to law enforcement.
You just know they came from him, right?
I just know that in the one of the incoming communications we had, his name was stated as the either the source or where it was collected.
Okay. What about the timing? Do you know when these rounds that indicate they come from Seth Kinney, do you know when those rounds came from Seth Kinney? If it was a month after the shooting, a day, 2 months, do you have any idea?
There would have been a date associated with that laboratory examination request, that incoming communication, so I could maybe assume around a specific time, but specifically no.
Okay, well, your report was dated May 3rd, 2012, right?
2020.
I mean 2022.
Yeah.
May 3rd, 2022.
That sounds correct.
Okay. And Mr. Ziegler or somebody else had already disassembled these items before you got them, right? So you know.
Yes, they were disassembled before I got them.
So did you review Mr. Ziegler's report to determine when they were submitted to him?
No, I did not.
Okay. But you would have received these items after Mr. Ziegler then, right?
That's my understanding, yes.
Okay. And isn't it true that you're not actually able to tell us whether two powders that you receive are from different, if the two powders from different locations actually originated from the same source?
What do you mean by source?
Like if they're from the same source of a cartridge.
No, I couldn't specifically. I can just say what I received and what my examination results were.
Well, but you can't say that they originated from the same source. You can only say that they're consistent, right?
If I was if I was trying to associate two things together, like comparing two things together, but in this case, both of the two powders within this submission, they were physically and chemically distinct from one another, so they wouldn't be able to be from the same source.
Well, but you have a way to. You can only say that they're consistent. You can't say that they are from the same source.
Oh, if say that these two powders were not different, both physically and chemically, the best I could say then was that they are physically and chemically consistent with one another, if that were even the case, which is not the way it is.
Now, I've seen, so it appears that there were several cartridges that were sent to the FBI laboratory for testing beyond the 11. And I just want to make sure you don't have an additional report, or you didn't test any of the other cartridges that went to the FBI lab other than these 11?
That's correct. I was only given 11 samples to examine.
And so it seems like the purpose of your work is to determine whether there's smokeless powder present, right?
Well, I would say the purpose is to determine whether or not the suspected ammunition propellant is ammunition propellant.
And that would be one type of ammunition propellant is smokeless powder that you're looking for, right?
Correct.
Okay. And in order to do that, you used this whole scientific process you just talked about on direct to determine whether these were live rounds, right? You actually had to look at the chemical composition of the powder in order to tell the difference, right?
No, I never made a determination as to whether or not something was a live round. From my explosives chemistry examinations, I determined whether or not they were explosives, specifically ammunition propellant, specifically smokeless powder.
Right, but in order to do that, you actually had to do a chemical composition of the powder to tell the difference, right?
Correct.
And the technique that you had to do to do that is, and you were trying to tell if this, it was, I think you said what, visual microscopic inspection first, right?
Correct.
And then you also did a thermal susceptibility test.
Correct.
And then infrared, like spectroscopy.
Spectroscopy.
Yeah, but the spectroscopic techniques.
Correct.
Is that what? Okay. And then there was one more. It was the gas chromatography. Is that right?
Correct.
All right. So that sounds very scientific here. These tests are all done in a laboratory, right?
Correct.
And that is the way that you determine if this powder is in fact an ammunition propellant. Is this all scientific, in the lab kind of stuff?
Correct. By following the specific technical procedure that we have.
And your procedure also produced over 100 pages of notes, didn't it?
Not specifically notes, I would say case notes. They were probably shorter than that, maybe a dozen or so, but all of the instrument data, definitely over 100 pages.
All right. I'm going to switch gears a little bit to, you were asked some questions about the manufacturer. Isn't it true that it's actually possible to determine the brand of a powder?
If there's enough identifying physical and chemical characteristics, it potentially could be possible, yes.
Okay, and that's something that you are able to perform, but you weren't asked to do that in this case?
No, we weren't asked to do that.
In fact, does the FBI have a standard operating procedure for smokeless powder analysis that discusses brand determination?
Not specifically brand determination, but trying to find a specific type of smokeless powder, yes.
Are you saying there's no FBI SOP that talks brand determination?
I don't recall specifically brand determination being in it, but maybe it is. But there are ways, and we do even have a database of several hundred different smokeless powders. But we could compare results to, but we weren't asked to do that. And sort of as you alluded to, it's very, very hard to say that two things are the same. Technically, it would be very, very hard for us to say these two powders are these specific type of brand. But if there were enough physical and chemical distinct characteristics within them that we could hopefully at best narrow it down to a brand and maybe like a line of products.
Right, and in fact what you just said with the FBI's laboratory having a database with smokeless powders that can assist in brand name determination, that's in the SOP, isn't it?
Yes.
Okay. But you weren't asked to go through that database in this case, or to do that?
No, there was no request to try to determine the specific manufacturer.
Okay. So let's talk about, I think you also took some measurements, right, of the diameter of the particles?
Correct.
And the purpose of that, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's you can, in taking the diameter, you can compare the similarities and differences of the diameters, right?
Yes.
That's a purpose. But in this case, you weren't asked to perform an associations analysis?
Oh, we don't have an associations analysis.
Okay.
But I did differentiate between the two different types of powders that were identified.
Right, but in terms of actually comparing them, let's talk about the weighing. You didn't weigh the powder, right?
No, I did not.
Okay, and that would be another way, would you agree, to differentiate the different particles by weighing it?
But by how one specific particle weighs?
Right.
Yes.
And so you don't know because you didn't weigh them, I guess, if these were partially full or completely full, the cartridges, when the powder was in them.
Oh, no, I didn't. I didn't do any sort of weight examination, no.
But wouldn't weight tell you, weighing the powder would tell you how much was in the cartridge, right?
Yes, in terms of weight, yes.
Now, I think we were talking a little bit about timeline earlier. I think you said that your work in this case, your report was dated in May of 2022, but your work is actually done in like April of 2022. Is that right?
Correct. I believe I started in April of 2022.
And how soon would you start? I mean, you can tell me, can you extrapolate from that? If you started your work in April, did your report in May, when these items were received by you?
By me, I would have to look at the chain of custody.
Okay. Would it be close to April of 2022?
I would expect it to be April of 2022.
Okay. So you weren't provided with these until April of 2022?
I would have to look at the chain of custody to be certain, but I believe I received them in April of 2022.
All right. And I mean, you said you're the chemist, you did all the tests here, but you have no personal knowledge about where these were on October 21st of 2021, right?
Correct.
Just a second. Pass the witness.
Redirect.
Mr. Gillette, does the FBI and your lab in particular have procedures and policies in place that discuss cross-contamination of evidence?
Objection, you're outside the scope.
She asked him.
I never asked about cross-contamination.
Overruled.
Go ahead and answer.
Yes, we do.
Can you describe those policies and procedures to the jury, please?
Specifically within the explosives unit, we minimize, reduce, and eliminate cross-contamination a number of different ways. When we start our examinations wherever we're working, we don clean PPE, so lab coat, gloves, safety glasses, but we have to clean our work surface typically with isopropanol, so rubbing alcohol, and then put down clean butcher paper so that the surface we're working on is clean and not contaminated, and that we, anytime we handle a different sample, we either do that, change our gloves, just those sort of procedures to make sure we're not introducing anything into the sample that isn't part of the sample.
Do you ever work on two samples at the same time?
Yes.
In what circumstances would you work on two samples at the same time?
Or I can contain them and keep them separated from one another.
Okay. Nothing further.
All right, you're excused. Thank you, sir. Next witness.
Your Honor, the state calls Geraldine Conway. Can you approach? Yeah.
Law that the testimony you'll give in this case will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
All right, thank you. Have a seat talking to the microphone.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
How are you today?
I'm well, thank you.
Great. Would you please state your name for the record?
Yes, my name is Geraldine Conway. It's spelled JerrylynConway.
And what's your current occupation?
I'm a DNA examiner in the DNA casework unit at the FBI laboratory.
And what are some of your responsibilities as a DNA examiner?
As an examiner, I basically manage a case. When a case comes to our unit for DNA testing, I determine what testing we're going to do on those items of evidence, and then a team of biologists will do the testing for that case. I'll review the results of that test. I'll determine if more tests need to be conducted, and then I'll do comparisons and write a report, and then testify as needed.
Great. Tell us about your educational background.
I have a Bachelor's of Science in Genetics from Texas A&M University and a Master's of Science in Molecular Biology from New Mexico State University.
And prior to working at the FBI, what kind of experience did you have?
I worked in a genetics lab at New Mexico State University working on cotton genetics testing.
Great. And you may have already said, I missed it, how long have you been working at the FBI?
I've been there since 2000, so almost 24 years.
Great. And have you attended any specialized training for the position you currently hold at the FBI?
I did. I went through about a 2-year training program. I took moot court examinations so that I could be sure to be able to explain my results to a group of jurors. And then I also took oral board examinations in the fields of serology, genetics, and statistics.
Great. And have you ever been recognized by a court previously as an expert witness in this field?
I have, yes.
Great. Your Honor, I move that the court recognize Ms. Conway as an expert witness in the field of forensic serology and DNA analysis. Bless you, Your Honor.
No objection.
All right.
All right.
I so admitted I don't want to have to repeat that when I sneezed and couldn't hear some of it. All right.
Forensic serology and DNA analysis.
Thank you, admitted.
All right. Thank you. What is forensic serology?
Forensic serology is the identification of body fluids, such as blood, on items of evidence.
And how do you perform serological examination on items of evidence?
When a biologist looks at an item of evidence, they'll look for areas of staining. So those areas of staining then will be tested with chemicals. A small portion of that stain will be swabbed using a swab is like a Q-tip with just the cotton on one end. That moistened Q-tip will be used to sample a small portion of that stain. And then chemicals will be added to that swab and a color change will be expected. If it's positive, that means that blood might be present on that item. It's considered a presumptive test. And if it's negative, then blood was not detected on that item.
Great. And can you give us just a general description of what exactly is DNA?
DNA stands for deoxyribonucleic acid, and it acts as our genetic blueprint. We inherit our DNA from our parents. We get half from our mother and half from our father, and we basically have 2 copies of our DNA.
And where is DNA found?
DNA is found in our cells, and our cells are the building blocks of our bodies. And if you think of a cell like an egg, then the yolk of the egg, we call that the nucleus. And the nuclear DNA is what we test in our forensic testing.
And how can DNA be used to differentiate between different individuals?
Most of our DNA is the same. However, there is a small portion that is different among us. Some of those portions are tested in our forensic testing, and those portions are called STRs, which stands for short tandem repeats. These repeats are pieces of DNA that are repeated over and over. When we do DNA testing, we determine how many repeats an individual has in their DNA, and then we're able to look at those areas that differ among individuals.
Can you describe for the jury what's the procedure that you use to develop a DNA type?
The procedure goes through a step-by-step process in the laboratory, and when the biologist sees that there's a stain to be tested, then they can either cut that stain or they might use another swab to swab a portion of that stain. That stain or that swab will be cut and put into a tube that's barcoded and then moves through the rest of the process. After it's collected, then it's extracted, and extraction just means that the DNA is purified away from the rest of the material. So the material it was collected on, and then any other cellular material that might be present. The next step is quantitation, where a portion of that sample is put into an instrument to determine how much DNA is present in that sample, and then a portion of the sample is taken based on that quantitation to the next step, which is amplification. The amplification means that there are those pieces that we're interested in, those STRs, are amplified so that they can be detected in an instrument. So after the amplification is complete, then a small portion of that sample is moved onto an instrument to separate it out by size. After it's sized, then I can look at that resulting data and determine the DNA profile from that sample.
And what's a reference sample?
A reference sample is a sample from an individual, and we know whose DNA that is. So it goes through all of the same processes to get a DNA profile at the end. But in this case, I know whose DNA is present in that sample, and I can use it for a comparison.
Great. And what does a DNA profile look like?
A DNA profile basically looks like peaks on a graph. So that instrument that separates it out by size, when those pieces move through that instrument, then they are recorded by the instrument. And then I can look at that data. Basically, we look at 21 different locations to determine a person's DNA profile. Those 21 different locations have results at those locations which end up just being numbers. And remember, we get half of our DNA from mom and half from dad, which means that at any given location, a person might have one result, which means they got the same number of repeats from mom and dad, or they have two results, so they get two different numbers of repeats from mom and dad.
And what is a mixed profile?
So a mixed DNA profile means that more than one person's DNA is detected on the sample that has been analyzed. And I can tell that it's a mixture when I see more than two results at any of those locations that I test.
So after you develop a profile, what's your next step in terms of how do you do your comparison?
So my next step is to look at the DNA types from the reference sample, from someone whose DNA I know it came from, and compare that to the sample that I got from the evidence. When I do that comparison, I might have enough information that I can exclude that person outright. If I can, then I will do that. If not, then I'll use a statistical program to assess how common or rare the DNA types are in the sample, and also could this person be a contributor to that DNA profile.
So aside from that, what other conclusions can you draw from a comparison?
So once I've used my statistical analysis, I have a result that's called a likelihood ratio. This likelihood ratio is basically a comparison of two different explanations for the DNA evidence. One explanation is that the person who I'm comparing to is a contributor to that profile. And the other explanation is that person is not a contributor, and rather an unknown, unrelated person is a contributor to that evidence.
How do you calculate the significance of a match?
That likelihood ratio gives me a number, and that number, the higher it is, the more support I have for one of those explanations over the other. So remember, if the likelihood ratio is high, then the explanation that that person is a contributor is more supported than the explanation that that person is not a contributor.
And do you do any sort of ongoing testing to make sure that your results are reliable?
I know that my results are reliable because our laboratory goes through there's a number of quality assurance procedures that are in place at the laboratory. We use controls to ensure that the results, we use a positive control to show that our tests are working and we get an expected result from a positive control. And then we also use negative controls to ensure that we have no contamination in our reagents or chemicals that we use. We also, our biologists are highly trained. They're qualified to do the work, and they also wear personal protective equipment. They wear lab coats, they wear gloves, they wear masks and goggles to ensure that they don't contaminate the evidence they're working on either.
Thank you. Ms. Conway, how did you become involved in this case?
So this case was submitted to the DNA casework unit, and then I determined that the samples in this case needed to go through testing, and that testing was then conducted by the biologist. Following that testing, I then reviewed those results and wrote the report.
And exactly what sort of testing were you asked to perform?
We did both serology and DNA testing in this case.
All right. And what was the item that you tested?
We tested a revolver.
All right. I'm going to show you what's been previously marked as States Exhibit 9. Is your monitor on over there?
It is.
All right. Does this appear to be a photograph of the revolver that you performed your testing on?
It does.
Okay, great. Was your lab able to detect and obtain a usable DNA reference sample from this revolver?
We obtained a profile from a sample that was taken from the revolver, yes.
Okay. And did you have comparators to check the reference sample against?
We compared this to 4 reference samples that were submitted in this case.
And do you know who those 4 are?
Yes, I do. We got a reference sample from Alexander Baldwin, a reference sample from Hannah Gutierrez, a reference sample from David Halls, and a reference sample from Sarah Zachary.
And what were the results of your comparisons? Were you able to include or exclude any of these reference individuals?
Yes, for each of those individuals, I developed a likelihood ratio, and the likelihood ratio is different for each person. So the likelihood ratio for Mr. Baldwin, the DNA results from the sample from the revolver are 110,000 times more likely if Mr. Baldwin and 2 unknown unrelated individuals are contributors to that sample, rather than if 3 unknown unrelated individuals are contributors to that sample.
And with regard to Ms. Gutierrez, what were your findings?
With regard to Ms. Gutierrez, the DNA results from that sample from the revolver are equally likely if Ms. Gutierrez and 2 unknown unrelated individuals are contributors to that sample, rather than if 3 unknown unrelated individuals are contributors to that sample. This means that the DNA analysis was, the likelihood ratio was 1, and that DNA analysis was uninformative.
Okay. So is it fair to say you can't say for sure whether Ms. Gutierrez handled this gun?
I can't say for sure whether her DNA was detected in the sample that I analyzed.
Okay,
That's
thank
right.
you. That's fair. I want to change gears a little bit, and I want to talk to you now about the DNA testing of cartridge casings. What can you tell the jury about the FBI policy of testing cartridge casings?
The policy at the FBI is to not conduct DNA testing on cartridge casings.
And why is that?
There's a limited chance that DNA would be obtained from those cartridge casings, especially if they have been fired. The heat from firing a weapon is significant enough that DNA can be very degraded and broken down from that heat.
And is the policy the same even if the cartridge hasn't been fired?
That's right. It's not our policy to test cartridge casings.
Okay. So if the Santa Fe County Sheriff's Office had sent you some casings to test, what would you have done with those?
We would not have tested them.
Okay, great. Thank you. I'll pass the witness.
Cross-exam.
Thank you, Your Honor. Ma'am, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
So, are you saying that the FBI policy is never to test cartridges for DNA?
Our general policy is to not test them. That's right.
Our general policy. So, does that mean it ever happens?
I believe it has happened in some cases, but our policy is to not accept those cases.
Okay, well, for example, a terrorism case comes through. Very important, right? Terrorism case is presented to you. They say, we need you to test cartridges for DNA. Has something like that ever happened at the FBI?
I'm not aware specifically of a case where they have been tested.
Okay, but you are aware that the FBI can do that. They have the capability to test cartridges for DNA.
It's possible to test them, yes, but there's a number of reasons that we do not, and our case acceptance is to not test them.
Okay, and the allocation of resources, whatever that may be, but you can do that as a unit, as the FBI. You're not telling the jury the FBI can't test rounds for DNA, are you?
Testing for DNA requires that a sample in our lab would be swabbed, and that would also destroy any latent fingerprints that might be present. And so our policy is to leave those samples for latent fingerprints.
Okay, so you would prefer latent fingerprints be collected from those?
Perhaps.
Okay. Now, in this case, you received 4 names, 4 DNA buccal swabs.
I did.
And a buccal swab for the jury, is that inside your...
It's a cheek swab from the inside of your cheek.
Okay, and that gets the DNA that you can use later for the comparison.
That's right.
Okay, now you did not receive Seth Kenny buccal swab, did you?
I did not.
Okay. And you did not receive anybody else other than those 4 individuals?
That's correct.
And so your primary conclusion in this case was that Baldwin likely touched the revolver, correct?
My primary conclusion is that the DNA that I tested supports the inclusion of Mr. Baldwin as a contributor to that DNA, yes.
Okay. And the other part I didn't quite understand, the 3 unknown contributors, but the bottom line is the likelihood he touched it. Obviously, he said he did.
His DNA is consistent with the DNA that I found on the gun, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Nothing further.
All right. Thank you, you're excused.
Your Honor, can we approach?
Sure. We're going to take a 5-minute break on conferring. I think it's easier if you just stay here instead of transported back and forth, but certainly stand, stretch, drink some water. We're not going to stand for you, though, for now. Affirm under penalty of law that the testimony you'll give in this case will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do, Your Honor.
All right, have a seat, talking to the microphone.
Go ahead and state your name for the record, please.
Ross Adiego.
Spell your last name if you would.
Addiego.
Mr. Adiego, how are you currently employed?
As a dolly grip.
Can you explain to the ladies and gentlemen of the jury what a dolly grip does?
I help the camera department in any way possible with camera support. So any camera movement, whether on a dolly, camera cranes, rigging a camera to vehicles, I assist them in any way that I can as a representative from the grip department.
You do this on movie sets?
Movie sets, television sets, music videos, commercials, yes.
Give us a little bit of an idea of your background and experience in the film industry. How long have you been working as a dolly grip or generally kind of as camera supportive crew?
I've been in the industry almost 30 years at this point.
And when we talk about film credits, tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury what we mean when we say film credits.
On a TV show, we wouldn't often be listed at the end of the show. On a movie, you would see credits roll at the end of a movie. But online, there's a database, internet movie database that kind of tracks not only the productions, the shows, the actors, and also the crew, which I would fall under. So that essentially acts as a resume for me.
And on that online database, approximately how many film credits do you have?
Over 100.
And would you say that over 100 is approximately the number of film credits that you really have?
I would say that represents half of my time on set. Certain things don't get, a lot of commercials don't get listed, music videos don't get listed. Most of my TV and film work, I think, is on there.
Okay. So your total amount of credits might be closer to 200?
That's probably a safe assessment, yes.
Okay. And back in October of 2021, how were you employed?
I was employed as the A-camera dolly grip on a little movie called Rust.
So when you say a camera, is there more than one camera?
Yes, that movie had two cameras, an A camera and a B camera.
And is that common?
It is very much common, yes.
Have you ever worked on films that had more than two cameras?
Yes.
And have you worked on films that had only one camera?
Yes.
So as the A camera dolly grip, can you just kind of walk us through what you're doing on set?
In the simplest terms, helping the director of photography capture the director and writer's vision for the project.
And specifically, how are you doing that? Physically, what are you doing?
Again, assisting with the camera movement. On this movie, we had a good number of crane shots, so high and wide, to see the western town or the beautiful environment we were in. A lot of dolly moves, so there was constantly movement throughout the story, whether moving into a set or coming out of a set to reveal other characters.
So what's the dolly and what is the dolly used for?
The dolly is a piece of camera support equipment used in lieu of a tripod or another stable or static camera support apparatus. So the dolly typically has 8 wheels, different size dollies depending on the project, and it also has a hydraulic boom system, so I can, with my controls, boom the camera up and down, whether during the shot or to set up a shot and get the camera where both the director of photography and the camera operator and the director think it best tells the story we're trying to tell in that moment.
And who was the director of photography for this film?
Helena Hutchins.
And who was the director for this film?
Joel Souza.
And do you recall, was the camera operator for camera A always the same person?
Until the fateful day, it was the same person.
And who was that person?
His name was Andy. His last name escapes me at this moment.
Okay. In this film, was camera A always on a dolly?
No.
So other than the camera filming from the dolly, how else can cameras film?
We did a good bit of handheld. So my cameraman would have the camera on his shoulder, by his hip, and I would assist him with that weight and keeping him safe as he's moving around.
And let me stop you right there.
Yes.
Approximately how much does that camera weigh?
On that project, it was, depending on the lens, 40-ish pounds.
Okay. Go ahead, sir.
And then we also had Andy on a man-rideable crane, which means that I could put him on a camera crane that was 20 some odd feet long or longer and kind of put him up in the air to get wide vistas of our sets and locations.
So how long had filming been going on the set of Rust prior to October 21st?
We were a couple of weeks into it.
And when you say a couple of weeks, are we talking, how many days are in the work week?
My recollection is we were doing 5-day weeks, but at some point our weeks shifted. I think we were doing a Tuesday through Saturday schedule, so we were 10 to 12 days in, I believe, at that point.
Okay, 10 to 12 days of actual filming.
Correct.
Okay, because you had weekends.
We did. We typically had whatever our union protocol was, 2 days off, 48 hours or some such.
Now, with regard to all of your film credits, can you tell the jury approximately how many projects you've worked on where there was an armorer on the crew?
Can't give you an exact number, but a dozen or more at this point in my career.
And why would a production company hire an armorer?
Because they plan to use potentially deadly weapons and ammunition.
And what is your understanding of what the responsibilities of a set armorer are?
Your Honor, I'm going to object. May we approach on this?
Sure.
Mr. Audiego, based on your experience working on films with armorers, do you know what the armorer is responsible for?
Yes.
Can you tell us?
My understanding of the armorer's responsibilities is Any working firearms and any ammunition is under their control.
And when you say that working firearms and ammunition are under your control, are under their control, let me ask you, in your experience, are there certain industry protocols that are followed on movie sets by armorers?
Yes.
Your Honor, I'm going to object again to lack of foundation.
I'm going to sustain that objection.
You've testified that you have worked on 12 movie sets with armorers. Is that correct?
It is correct.
12 or more.
At least 12.
Has that experience made you familiar with what you believe are the industry protocols for armorers on movie sets?
Your Honor, again, I want to object. It sounds
Counsel
like
approach.
Mr. Odiego, in the films that you worked on where there was an armorer, and for the purposes of this question, we're excluding the movie Rust, did you notice certain safety protocols that you yourself saw armorers engage in all of those movies up until you got to the movie Rust?
Yes.
So I'd like to talk to you about those. In the other movies where there were armorers that you worked on, can you describe for the ladies and gentlemen of the jury how, under what circumstances in your experience can you describe the safety protocols that the armorers on those other movies engaged in when they would bring a firearm onto set for use in filming a scene?
Your Honor, I'm also going to object to relevance. What happened on other movies has no relevance to what happened on Rust.
Response.
Can we approach?
Sure.
All right, Mr. Adiego, let's proceed. Do you recall the question?
If you'd give it to me again, please.
Walk us through your experience with safety protocols by film set armorers when the armorer brings a weapon onto set to be used in the filming of a scene prior to your experience on the set of Rust.
My experience has been that typically the armorers would have some sort of safety meeting or lecture before any of firearms are going to be used in the filming of a scene.
And I'm going to stop you right there. In terms of the safety meeting, who is the person on set, in your experience, who usually calls for the safety meeting?
The first assistant director.
And that would not be Ms. Gutierrez?
No, it would not.
Who was the first assistant director in this case?
The first assistant director on Rust is Dave Halls.
Okay. So you mentioned one of the first things that happens is there's a safety meeting.
Typically, we would discuss, I guess I should back up. Typically, when we receive our call sheets, an email call sheet the night prior to filming.
Okay, hang on just a second, because I don't know that we have very many people here that are in the film industry. What's a call sheet?
So I would receive an email, typically receive an email every night before filming, and that email would include a call sheet that would list who will be on set, both cast and crew. It'll tell us what scenes we're doing, it'll tell us locations, kind of general information for the day, weather, what time the sun goes up and down, whatever production feels is pertinent information. And then a lot of times what they'll attach to that email are the sides, the actual parts of the script we're shooting for the day, and then safety bulletins, whatever union safety bulletins would be appropriate for that day, whether firearms or animals, inclement weather. And then on the day of filming, typically the first assistant director would call for a safety meeting and call all of the cast and crew that would be involved to listen to that meeting. And potentially the armorer may have something to say as far as what we're doing if we're firing blanks. Here's the...
But hang on, I'm going to stop you right there. So hypothetically, if the scene calls for the firing of blanks, because we haven't had a lot of this testimony in trial yet, can you explain to the jurors what your understanding is about the difference in the different loads of blanks?
In my experience, the armorer would tell us if we're using dummies or blanks, and if we're using blanks, which would make a noise in a flash, they would typically describe the power. Quarter load, half load, full load would give us some indication as to the potential danger with that particular firearm being used by the actor in that scene.
And let me stop you right there. You talked about the particular danger. Can blanks be dangerous on a movie set?
My understanding is they can, yes.
And are there certain... Is there certain safety gear that some crew members may use if there is going to be the firing of blanks in their immediate proximity?
Yes.
And can you explain to the jurors what that would be, in your experience?
Certainly. The very basic personal protective equipment we would use would at the very least be safety glasses and some form of hearing protection, pardon me. But sometimes it may be covering the camera operators that may be in jeopardy with special coats to deflect anything coming out of those firearms. We may protect the camera and the lens with special acrylics like Lexan bulletproof glass, essentially. So yes, we would take certain precautions.
Is that the reason that it's important for you to know what size blank is going to be used?
Yes.
And with regard to dummies, go ahead and continue to kind of walk us through how this would work.
So typically, depending on the firearms being used, in this case it was a Western, so a lot of the firearms were older Western style 6 guns where you would see if the gun was potentially loaded or not. And sometimes that may simply mean loaded with a dummy round, so if the camera saw the front of the firearm, the audience would think that it was absolutely a loaded firearm, but the dummy rounds typically for us as the crew are different than the blanks in that they may appear as though they're a real bullet, but they would typically have a hole drilled in them or the primer at the end that would ignite that bullet would be removed or already be pushed in. And then sometimes the dummies, depending on how they're being used in the film, you can't make holes in them. So what I guess the props people that make them put a little BB in there. So the armor can shake that dummy and you would hear a little BB rattle in there, and that's supposed to let us know that that particular bullet or round is safe.
So, is this the information that you would receive at a safety meeting?
Both at a safety meeting, and I believe some of this is stated in the safety bulletins put out by IATSE.
And what is IATSE?
IATSE is the union most filmmakers belong to. It's International Alliance of Theatrical Stage Employees.
And do actors also belong to IATSE?
Typically, no.
Do they have their own union?
I believe they refer to it as a guild, but they would be the Screen Actors Guild is what the actors typically belong to, yes.
Is IATSE the union for crew members as opposed to cast?
It is, yes.
Okay. Now, the call sheet and the email and the safety bulletin that you've referred to, in your experience, who provides that to the cast and crew? Is it the armor?
No, that's generated by production. Someone in production would generate that and get it out to us whether it's an email or given to us on set.
So Ms. Gutierrez wouldn't have been responsible for that?
Not with what I know.
And you indicated that in terms of safety meetings, the safety meetings are called by the assistant director and not the armorer. Is that correct?
That is correct.
With regard to safety bulletins, was there a difference between the way that safety bulletins were handled on the set of Rust and the way that safety bulletins were handled on the other films you participated in that had firearms and armorers?
Yes.
Tell us the difference.
So in those emails that I referred to earlier, it typically would say, please, would ask us to please refer to the appropriate safety bulletins, and then they would list the number of that bulletin, and then in that email I'd be able to click on a link if I so chose to review that bulletin. I don't recall any of those bulletins actually being attached to our emails during Rust.
You don't recall ever getting a single one?
I don't recall ever receiving a safety bulletin from Rust Productions, no.
Let's jump to safety meetings. On the other sets that you worked on that had guns and armorers, how frequently would a safety meeting occur?
At least once a day, if not more frequently.
And on the set of Rust, how frequently did safety meetings occur?
I don't know that I was invited to more than one during our couple of weeks on Rust.
So for the entire 2 weeks, you are only aware of one safety meeting?
That's my recollection, yes.
Okay, so we've talked about safety bulletins and safety meetings. Go ahead and continue to walk us through, in your experience, the protocol of an armor with firearms.
In my experience, the armors are usually the, well, for lack of a better description, the most uptight and anal retentive people on set, because they literally have people's lives in their hands. They don't joke around. They don't really have friendly conversations. They stick to themselves and focus on the task at hand. Most of them, in my experience, seem to be either former military or law enforcement and have some sort of background with firearms.
Did you notice a difference then generally in terms of just the behavior, the general behavior on the movie set of the other armors you worked with as compared to Ms. Gutierrez?
Yes.
What was that?
She wasn't necessarily as serious or professional as I'm accustomed to with the other armors that I've worked with.
What do you mean? Give us an example.
I recall walking by her cart a number of times, and firearms and or bandoliers or ammo belts being left out on the cart unsecured. I don't know that I've ever seen an armor pull loose ammo out of a fanny pack. Typically, my experience with armors is any ammo they use, blanks or dummies, comes out of some sort of container, whether it's a labeled box or some other plastic type ammo container. So.
Now, in terms of, you indicated that you would see firearms and gun belts unattended on the cart. Why was that? Why did that stand out to you?
It was out of the ordinary. Again, my experience is most of the firearms I've seen on set come out of some sort of locked bag, locked container. The armor, some armors, depending on the show, have a whole wheel around cart with drawers that they can lock. A drawer that potentially has the individual's actor's or character's name on that drawer. So that character's props would live in that drawer under lock and key.
Were the guns and gun belts laying out unattended on the prop cart, was that a safety concern for you?
Yes.
Why?
It seemed inappropriate and out of the ordinary that those firearms weren't secured.
And why is it concerning that the firearms aren't secured?
Well, I don't know that they're completely under the armorer's control if they're not under lock and key.
And what's your understanding of whether those firearms that you saw unattended, were they fake guns or were they real guns?
My understanding, most of the prop firearms we had on Rust were actual working firearms. So.
Okay. Now, based on your experience, just generally, what is the armorer responsible for?
Your Honor, again, this is expert testimony. He's a camera operator, and he's asking to give expert testimony on what armors do.
He's not, sorry.
This is based upon his personal experience only, and as long as it stays there, it's fine.
Go ahead, sir.
If you don't mind the question again, please.
What is your understanding, based on your experience, of the armorer's responsibilities on a movie set?
to control and keep safe all firearms and ammunition on a given set.
Okay. Go ahead and walk us through, if you will, what in your experience are the safety checks that take place when an armorer is bringing a firearm onto the set for filming.
Typically, the first AD, the first assistant director, would notify us that we're going to use firearms for a scene. Whether they're loaded or not, they would say something about the fact that we're bringing something that's maybe not a rubber dummy, but an actual firearm onto set. And then typically the armorer would invite the first AD, the cast members involved, and any crew that would like to see both the firearm and the ammunition to see those safety checks, whether that's looking through the barrel, shaking those rounds we discussed, the dummy rounds, to hear that BB, or explaining to us that the actor is going to fire X number of blanks and they're going to be of a certain power, and then making sure that anybody that's going to be in close proximity has the appropriate safety equipment they need, and they're prepared for that moment on camera.
So what you just described regarding the armorer showing the gun and allowing people to look down the barrel, why would that be important to crew members?
Because unfortunately there have been accidents in the past where the barrels weren't cleaned in firearms and a blank was fired and whatever debris was in that barrel injured or killed somebody on set.
So with regard to your experiences with Ms. Gutierrez, were the cast and crew ever invited to look down the barrel?
Not to my recollection.
And was that concerning to you?
It was.
Why?
Well, they call them safety checks for a reason, and we were moving through those instead of pausing to have those checks.
With regard to the sequence that you described where the armorer shows the dummy rounds to the cast and crew, and I want to be clear, in your experience, does the armorer hand you the dummy round or the blank so that you can shake it?
No, I'm not actually allowed to touch the firearms or ammo. So if a particular round was in question, we could ask for them to, show us that it is one type of round or another.
And with regard to dummies, how would the armorer do that?
Again, in my experience, the way the dummy rounds are manufactured, you would have one of potentially three indicators that it is not a live round. One being a hole drilled in potentially one side or two sides of the brass, so you'd actually see a hole in the bullet. Sometimes the primer is either already struck by something or it's removed altogether, the primer being the end of the bullet, or they would shake them like you'd hear like a rattle because there's a BB inside that brass or steel case.
Who is the person responsible for shaking them for you or showing them to you?
The armorer.
And on the set of Rust, did Ms. Gutierrez do any of that?
Not that I recall.
In your experience on other movies, when is the gun loaded with the ammunition by the armorer? And let me kind of make that more pointed. Is that something that's done away in secret, or is that something that's done in front of cast and crew?
Bless you. No, in my experience, it would be within moments of that safety check where the cast and or crew are invited to see that firearm. They would then load that firearm knowing that we're about to roll the camera. Some armors, for reasons unknown to me, would in fact not even hand that firearm to the actor. They would actually place that firearm in the actor's holster and then indicate to the first assistant director that they're good to go, and then the assistant director typically would call rolling at that point.
So the gun is generally, in your previous experience, loaded with either the dummies or the blanks right there in front of cast and crew?
Correct.
Is that a practice that Ms. Gutierrez followed?
Not to my recollection.
Do you recall ever watching her or taking note of her loading the gun in the presence of cast or crew?
I think there were a couple of times on set where we were doing these quick resets instead of cutting the camera, where she was put in a position to reload that as quickly as she could and hand it back to our actors.
And when you say she was put in a position, who would have put her in that position?
In that particular instance, both the first assistant director that's in charge of safety and the actor-producer, Alec Baldwin.
And with regard to your experience on other movies, have you ever seen an armor slow down that pace so that they are not being rushed?
Yes.
Did Ms. Gutierrez ever take any steps to slow those things down if she was being rushed?
Not that I ever saw.
Give me just one moment. Were you present for the filming of every scene that was filmed on the set of Rust during those 2 weeks?
I believe I was present for every scene, maybe not every take.
And when you say take, explain to the jurors what you're talking about.
So the scene may require a couple of, each time we roll the camera and cut, that would be considered one take. So depending on what the director was wanting, or if the actors maybe weren't happy with their performance, we would potentially do multiple takes as we worked our way through the different angles of a scene. So it may be from one actor to the next, we shoot one direction and do a couple of takes with one actor and then change directions and perhaps a couple of takes with the next actor that's in that same scene with them.
So with regard to the individual takes that were recorded, were you present for every single take that was filmed?
I was not.
Approximately, if you can give us a percentage, what percentage of those individual takes were you present for?
I think it would be safe to say I was there for 95% or more of them.
Okay. In terms of the way that you've experienced this on other movie sets, how does the armorer behave with regard to, if the armorer provides a gun to an actor, in your experience on other movie sets, does the armor just walk away?
In my experience, the armor's never out of eyesight of whatever weapons or ammo they're in charge of.
Was that the case on the set of Rust?
It was not.
Describe to us what you saw on the set of Rust with regard to that particular issue, that being the armorer always staying within eyesight of the gun.
I don't know that the armor was always within eyesight of the firearms being used on set.
Okay. And do you recall being present on the set of Rust on a day where there were what I'm going to refer to as accidental discharges of guns?
Yes.
Can you describe the first accidental discharge that you recall happening?
I think the first one was I don't know if the prop master was loading or unloading.
And let me stop you. What's the prop master's name?
Sarah, I think her name was Sarah Zachary.
Okay.
Was her name. We were outside of the character Rust's cabin, and I don't know if she was loading or unloading a handgun, but unannounced to any of the crew, that firearm discharged. So we consider that a negligent discharge.
And how did you know it discharged?
I was within feet of it, and she seemed pretty spooked when I turned around, and it appeared as though she had shot that firearm at her foot.
Can you tell us, in your experience, in your opinion, what you think that gun was loaded with?
It made a bang, but it didn't, I don't know if there was a bullet or not, because I don't know if it hit her foot, but it certainly made a loud noise that spooked us and the animals we had on set. I think we had a couple of horses on set, and again, it was unannounced, so it was a surprise to everybody that was around.
Were you preparing to film a scene or a take at that time?
Yes.
Was it announced by anyone whether the guns were going to be loaded with dummies or blanks?
I don't think at that moment it had been, no.
Okay. So when that accidental discharge happened, I mean, what did it sound like?
A gun going off?
Okay. And you indicated that this accidental discharge occurred because that gun was being loaded or unloaded by the prop master, Sarah Zachary. Is that right?
That's correct.
In your previous experiences on other movie sets with armorers, did you ever see the prop master loading and unloading the guns?
I've never seen that, no.
And can you describe what the other accidental discharge was that happened?
So like I had stated, we were kind of outside the cabin we were using as Harlan Rust's cabin.
And I'm going to stop you real quick. Who's Harlan Rust?
Harlan Rust is the lead character in the movie, and that was played by Mr. Alec Baldwin.
Okay, please continue.
I believe it was Alec's stunt double, so somebody dressed up to look like Alec, was going to be firing either some sort of long gun. I don't remember if it was a lever action gun or a shotgun, something out of the window of the cabin towards, I think it was the law enforcement that were chasing him, that were starting to catch up with him. There was supposed to be some gunfire, and I believe that Hannah was prepping the stunt double in the cabin with that firearm, and again, unannounced to any of us outside the cabin, that firearm was discharged.
And what did it sound like?
A loud gun going off.
And if you can estimate, how much time passed between the first of these accidental discharges and the second?
My recollection is they were within an hour of one another.
And in your experience on other movies with armorers, are accidental discharges common?
No.
Have you ever experienced an accidental discharge on another movie?
I don't know that I have.
Council, is it okay if we take our afternoon? I can't do anything about the temperature, whether, I don't know if you're hot or cold, but probably hot, right?
Cold. Okay. Are we back on the record?
Yes.
All right. Mr. Audiego, I think that when we broke, you had just finished describing the accidental discharges to us. In your experience in the film industry and your opinion, who is responsible for accidental discharges on a movie set?
Your Honor, I'm going to object. Again, his opinion is he's not an expert. He has no idea, and we don't even know what set being talked about.
He's not being tendered as an expert. Now I'm hearing things. I apologize. Mr. Audiego, do you recall the question that was asked? You've been permitted to answer.
If you don't mind asking again, please.
In your experience and in your opinion, working in the film industry, what member of the crew is responsible for an accidental discharge?
I would say first and foremost the armor.
All right. Did the accidental discharges that you described cause you concern?
Yes.
Did you articulate that concern to anyone on set?
I did.
Who?
Both the first AD and his second in command on set, the second AD.
And when you say the first AD, who are you referring to?
Dave Halls.
And what did you say to Mr. Halls?
I don't recall my exact words to Mr. Hall, but I expressed my frustration and anger with the fact that safety seemed to be secondary to the production clock.
And without saying what Mr. Hall said, was Mr. Hall's responsive to your concerns?
Mr. Halls ignored me and walked away.
And what did you do then?
I went to his second, Ann, I don't recall Ann's last name, and expressed my anger and frustration and asked that this be put on the production report. So,
what's a production report?
The production report is essentially the diary of everything that happens throughout production on the film set.
Do you know whether or not this was ever included in the production report?
I do not.
Thank you. I'm going to take you to the morning of October 21st, 2021. Were you working on set that day?
I was.
And approximately what time do you think you arrived on set?
Pretty early. I believe our call was between 6 a.m. and 7 a.m. that day.
And what does that mean, your call?
So on that call sheet we've discussed, those emails would tell me specifically what time my department requires my presence on the set for each day. So that would be my call time for the day.
And when you arrived on set, did anything unusual happen?
Yes.
What was that?
The camera department had decided to leave the show due to safety concerns and some other concerns they had.
And if you can describe for the jurors what effect that had on the production and filming that day?
I would say it threw us into more of a state of chaos than we already were on that film that day.
Okay, so let's back up. You said it threw you into more of a state of chaos. Generally speaking, what was the state of speed in terms of chaoticness or not on this movie set generally?
I mean, at times we would, well, I guess we'd say we were moving at ludicrous speeds, that we're just trying to race the production clock because we understood that we had a finite amount of time to complete a very ambitious schedule. So we seem to always be rushed and under the gun to get stuff done and move on.
Is there a saying in the film industry, something about making your day?
Yes.
What does it mean in the film industry to make your day?
So if we know that on that call sheet we've been given that there are, for example, 4 scenes and production's budgeted 12 hours to complete that work in a day, if we complete that, we've made our day. Otherwise, production has to figure out where else to schedule that work to be completed.
Why is making your day or not making your day problematic on a film set?
My understanding of RUST Productions is they were budgetarily restricted to the number of days. Whatever deals happen that I'm not aware of, that are not privy to me. We had, Helena and I discussed having probably a few less days than we needed to actually complete their ambitious schedule in an appropriate manner with 2 cameras.
Okay, so you didn't have enough time.
In a nutshell, we certainly didn't have enough time to do what was being asked.
So you indicated that the camera crew walking off created more of a chaotic environment. Can you give the jurors a little bit more of a description about how not having them there was affecting things? And were they replaced?
Well, yes, they were replaced. So on most projects, but certainly on a small project where you're moving that fast, we all count on each other and become close in that short amount of time. And so the camera department had counted on me, and I had counted on them, and knew that I could trust them. And Helena had handpicked us all to make up her crew. So when suddenly, I think it was roughly 6 people of that crew decided to leave, that was certainly a disruptive thing. And I think we soon learned that their replacements certainly weren't as qualified as they were, and also they only replaced one of the camera teams. So it also meant to me that this schedule is going to get much more intense because we now have half the equipment to do the same amount of work.
I want to just get an idea from you in the days of filming leading up to the 21st. Is it typical for the director of photography to be operating an actual camera?
Not typically, no. They hire an appropriate number of operators based on the cameras they have.
Where does the director of photography usually spend his or her time during filming?
Mostly on set with the crew and the cast. Occasionally they will go to what we would refer to as like the video village, which is where the monitors are set up for the producers, the writer, or maybe cast members that aren't involved in the scene to watch what's actually going on set.
So the 6 people that left, how many people came in to replace them?
My recollection is 2 to 3.
Okay. Did you have any discussions with Mr. Souza or Ms. Hutchins about making that day?
Yes.
And without saying what they said, what was your part of that conversation?
I think they were both concerned that potentially would, prevent us from completing that day, maybe even completing the movie. So I just tried to reassure them that the operator that stayed and I would, get them through the day, that we would, continue on and try to continue making the best film we could with the resources we were provided.
So you indicated one operator stayed. Is that a camera operator?
Correct.
And what was that person's name?
Reed Russell.
Thank you. So what was the first scene that you all were filming on October 21st? Just describe it to us generally. It doesn't have to be huge.
I believe it was a couple of the lawmen riding into this western town where we were filming with some kids, and it's supposed to be an average morning in a western town, whatever that is. So people going about their day. I think we had some animals on set, and I think it was the lawmen ride into town in pursuit of Harlan Rust.
And when you say you had some animals on set, what kind of animals would you have on this movie set?
Well, certainly the lawmen rode in on horseback, and I think we had some just kind of farm-type livestock. Every day kind of changed a little bit. There may have been some chickens, some goats, some cows, mules. There may have been other horses just tied up as prop horses. Again, this was supposed to resemble a lively, working western town.
In terms of those animals, are there specific crew members that are put in charge of managing and caring for those animals?
Yes.
Is there a name for those people?
They're typically called animal wranglers.
Okay. And were there animal wranglers employed on this movie set?
My recollection is there was a number of them, yes.
Okay. So were you all able to complete the filming of that scene with the children and the animals?
As far as I recall, we had completed that scene.
Do you recall, was there gunfire in that scene?
I don't recall. Okay. I know...
and we don't want you to assume.
No, the lawmen that rode into town were certainly armed as lawmen, but I don't recall any gunfire in that scene.
Okay, there wasn't a scene that required shootouts and blanks and stuff like that?
Not to my recollection, no.
Okay. And what then was the next scene that you all were going to be filming on that day?
I believe we moved to the church upon completion of that scene.
And what was your understanding of the scene that was to be filmed and perhaps was indeed filmed inside the church that morning?
That part of the story we were filming that day was, I think at that point in the story, Harlan Rust had been injured in one of the previous shootouts, story-wise, and he finds this church or happens upon this church, so he knows he's being pursued by the law. And I think it was story-wise that he goes to essentially hide in the church and in the hopes that he gets the draw on the lawmen when they enter the church. Kind of a last stand, if you will.
And was that scene actually filmed prior to the lunch hour that day?
Pieces of it.
Pieces of it were. Okay. And have you had an opportunity to see those short clips?
I think I saw one piece of that footage, yes, that was covered with the Steadicam.
Okay, because this isn't the first time you've met me.
It's not.
Okay. So I think that we have a stipulation to, let's start with State's Exhibit 112, if you can help me, Mr. Bowe. We'll get set up. Pretty good.
Well, just a minute. Do you have a stipulation? Are you going to move it in? Or is he going to recognize it first?
Yes. We have a stipulation. I would ask for the court to admit State's Exhibit 112 and permission to publish.
No objection, Your Honor.
All right, State's 112.
Okay, we're good. Well, it's short. Let's see if it works. Okay. If it doesn't, well, okay. I forgot about that. I'm back to my Apple computer. These are short clips. Hopefully it won't freeze. Fingers crossed. Do you see what's on your screen there, Mr. Adiego?
I do.
And can you, what is this thing that we see before these movie takes? What's the information on that and what's it called?
That would be considered the sound slate. So it's a slate provided by the sound department that is used in editing, and the script supervisor also uses it to keep track of scenes and takes.
And does it tell you the scene and the take? What's the handwritten stuff at the top? It looks like it says 26 and 118B1. Do you know what that means?
Mostly. So I can tell you that, of course, it has the title Rust. It tells you on the left corner the director's name, Joel Souza, and on the bottom right it has the director of photography's name, Helena Hutchins, and then it signifies that A signifies that it's the A camera, and I don't.
Is it A or is it B?
It appears to be a red A.
Okay.
Which
Okay.
would be
Sorry.
the A camera, and then it looks like on the top right corner that would be take number 1. And the other numbers typically would be a scene number, so it potentially is scene 26, and then I think 118B would be the note the script supervisor uses for the editors and the writers, and that stuff I don't really get involved with.
And who is the script supervisor for this film?
Our script supervisor was Mimi Mitchell, I believe was her last name.
Okay. And what is that the time? What numbers are we seeing there in red?
So it's time code, and depending on how the sound mixer and production wants to keep track of that, sometimes it's elapsed time. So if we started at 6 a.m. and we're 6 hours into the day, it would show you, that it's 6.00. Sometimes it's date and time, and I don't often deal with the details of the slate, so those numbers are generated by the sound department.
Okay.
And fed to the camera.
And this scene is taking place where?
This is it appears to be the church on Bonanza Creek Ranch.
Okay, leap of faith. We're going to press play and hope we don't have any technical difficulties. Let me start that again. We don't have any sound. Give me just one moment. Hang on just a second. I'm gonna hang on. Huh? Do you don't have these on there? Okay, good. So just hang on. Let me sort that out. Let Mr. Lewis try to sort out this technical issue, and we're going to continue with your testimony, and we'll come back to it as soon as we're ready. Go ahead. He can put it on that.
Okay.
He's going to need it. Okay, I apologize for that. The scene that was being filmed prior to the lunch hour that we're working up to showing, describe what this scene was supposed to be. What was your understanding of what was going to be filmed?
That Harlan Rust was going to be laying in wait in this church for the lawmen that he knew were pursuing him, and I think at this point in the story, rapidly catching up to him.
I'm sorry, with regard to firearms, what was your understanding about what, if any, firearms were going to be present and used during the filming of that scene?
What I understood was that we were going to finish the piece we started looking at, where it's the Harlan Rust's reaction to the lawmen coming in, and then we were going to film one more piece that we would refer to as an ECU, an extreme close-up, where you see Harlan Rust contemplating pulling his gun or not, kind of rubbing his hands, and then he starts to draw the firearm. My understanding is once we had that piece filmed, we were going to do what we would call a turnaround. So we'd then be filming from behind Harlan Rust, Alec Baldwin, seeing the I think it was 2 lawmen come into the church, and then the shootout would ensue from there.
So during the scene in the morning, was Mr. Baldwin armed with his prop gun?
Yes.
And what was your understanding about whether that was a real gun or a replica, meaning a rubber gun or plastic gun?
My understanding is Mr. Baldwin always wanted to use his, what we would refer to as his hero props. So I understood it to be a real cold gun at that point.
And when you say cold gun, explain to the jurors what you mean.
Cold gun would indicate that the armor and potentially first AD had deemed that weapon safe to be used on set. Cold referring to the fact that the trigger could be pulled and nothing would happen.
Did you know whether the gun in the morning was, whether it had dummies in it or whether it was just empty?
I don't know.
Okay. So how did you see for the morning session who brought Mr. Baldwin the gun?
I did not.
And how did that morning session inside the church go? Was it relatively uneventful? How was it?
I mean, other than the previously stated kind of state of rushed chaos we were in, I would say yes, mostly uneventful.
And then when you had completed those couple of takes that we're going to show here shortly, what happened then?
I think that's when we broke for lunch for the day.
And approximately how long was your lunch?
I think we were doing half-hour lunches. Maybe they might have been a little longer because where lunch was a little bit of a van ride from where we were filming.
And when you say a little bit of a van ride, how far away how was that set up?
I think that, the production clock for us works on 0.6 of an hour. So it may have been 6 minutes away. So if it was a half-hour lunch, it may have ended up being approximately 42 minutes, for that travel both ways, to and from catering.
And is the food just provided for you all right there on set?
But there's a caterer and a catering tent, yeah, if not on set, on the facility where we were filming, yes.
So approximately what time, if you know, would you have completed lunch and come back into the church to continue filming?
Again, I think we started between 6 or 7, so lunch would have been called at 12 or 1 and 42 minutes after that. So for argument's sake, 2 o'clock-ish.
Okay. And what was your understanding of anything that was going to take place immediately after lunch and perhaps before filming? Can you explain to the jurors?
I believe the decision was made. So we were, for parts of that scene, we were using a Steadicam, which is camera apparatus affixed to the camera operator. And I don't think they were getting quite what they wanted as far as how the photography was portraying the story. So I brought the dolly in so we could mount the camera on the dolly and give them a more stable platform.
Technical difficulties abound. Go ahead and have a seat. Thank you. Please continue, sir.
I think that was it for the...
Okay. So while these gentlemen were speaking to me, did you explain that this was going to be a blocking?
I did not.
Let's go there. Explain what the blocking is.
So the decision was made to go from Steadicam to the dolly. So once we, it takes a moment to convert that camera over from one use to another. So I'm getting the dolly close to the pew where Mr. Baldwin, Harlan Rust, would be sitting, and working with the camera operator, Reed. Helena had kind of mentioned where she wanted us, but I believe her and her gaffer were starting to prepare for the turnaround of when the lawmen came into the church. So we were just trying to find blocking the shot, we would call it, trying to find the shot that best told the story in that moment that the director wanted to tell, which was to be, my understanding was to be an extreme close-up of Alec starting to draw his weapon. And then, from what I know in the edit, his cut would have been, you as the audience, see that weapon start to leave his holster, and then we were going to then put the camera behind him to see the lawmen enter the church, and that's when this shootout would have begun in the church.
So were cameras rolling?
No, we were still blocking the shot.
And were you present in the church when Ms. Gutierrez brought the firearm into the church?
Yes.
And tell the jury what you saw and or heard.
I never saw the interaction between Hannah and Dave in the church, but I could hear Hannah telling Dave that the firearm had been checked before lunch and had been locked up during lunch, and then Dave called out cold gun or cold weapon. I heard the word cold, and that's when I went back to focusing on my task at hand, helping Reed and Helena find that insert shot.
Access the server. Let's see what's on the server. I'm still trying to iron out this issue. Thank you, Mr. Adiego.
Mm-hmm.
So, do you recall who said cold gun? Did you describe that?
I did. I heard Dave Hall's call. I don't recall if it was cold gun or cold weapon, but I heard the word cold, which typically for me is what I need to hear.
And cold gun means it's not going to go bang.
Correct.
Okay. With regard to Ms. Gutierrez's statement that you overheard about her not having checked the gun since lunch, did that cause you any concern?
It did.
Why?
Just accustomed to armors checking those guns again on a regular basis, and we had a break. And typically, that any firearm that's brought on set is checked, even if it had been checked previously.
Do you know how the gun got from Ms. Gutierrez to Mr. Baldwin?
I do not.
So after you heard Ms. Gutierrez's voice and you heard Mr. Hall's call out cold gun, where was the gun the next time you saw it?
In Mr. Baldwin's holster on his left side.
Did you see Ms. Gutierrez in the church?
I don't recall seeing her in the church after lunch, no.
So, go ahead and walk us through. Mr. Baldwin now has the gun. Where is he sitting? What is he doing? Take us through this.
Mr. Baldwin's seated in a church pew, and Reed and I are trying to find an angle, looking kind of over his right elbow or right bicep to see his hands in his lap transition from his lap to that firearm that's kind of hidden in a holster under the coat that he's wearing.
So if you can stand up, if you don't mind, and demonstrate what you believed Mr. Baldwin was supposed to do for the blocking.
My understanding was it was just to reveal that part of the gun that holds the bullets coming out of the holster, and then that portion of that piece of photography was finished. Once we saw that gun coming out of the holster, it would again give the audience the idea in that story that Harlan Rust is about to defend himself or try to shoot the lawmen before they shoot him as they enter the church.
How close were the cameras to Mr. Baldwin?
The only camera we had in the church was I think at that point I had the lens within a foot of Mr. Baldwin.
And do you recall where Ms. Hutchins was?
I do.
You do?
I do.
Would you explain?
So directly, if I'm sitting in the pew as Harlan Rust, Helena Hutchins was essentially directly in front of Rust, having a conversation with her gaffer. So there was maybe a couple of feet of air in between Mr. Baldwin and the pew that Helena and Serge were standing behind, directly in front of Mr. Baldwin.
And let me stop you. What's a gaffer? We don't know these terms.
My apologies. Gaffer is the head of the lighting department. So he was discussing with the director of photography. My understanding, of course, is they were discussing what we were going to do when we turned around to see the lawmen, because we were already lit for the direction that we were filming.
Do you remember the gaffer's name?
Serge is his first name. I believe his last name, and I don't want to slaughter it, but I think it was Savetne,
okay.
I believe is his last name.
Could you understand the conversation between Ms. Hutchins and Mr. Svetnoy? That's my
Thank you.
best try.
So often none of us could understand because they often conversed in either Russian or Ukrainian, as they were both born and raised in that part of the world. So,
Do you know where Mr. Souza was at this point in time?
Mr. Souza was shoulder to shoulder just to my right. He was looking at my dolly monitor so he could see what the camera was seeing.
So why would the director be in the room looking at your monitor? Well, let me ask it this way. Would the director normally be looking at that vantage point from Video Village?
Depends on the director and the situation. Sometimes they'll work with us more closely where they will be shoulder to shoulder, and we'll look at my monitor. We were still waiting for the new camera assistants to finish converting from Steadicam to what we'd call studio mode. So I don't believe the camera actually had a monitor, and potentially that's why he was looking over my shoulder instead of a bit removed in the Video Village.
Okay, we're going to pause for a moment. We think we're going to be able to watch these videos, and that's going to give everybody a much better idea of what was going on in there. Hope springs eternal. Okay, so we've already gone through the slate and et cetera, et cetera. I'm going to go ahead and play the video. This video will be marked as States Exhibit 112. What's that noise we hear, that ch-ch-ch-ch?
I'm not actually sure. I was trying to figure that out myself.
Okay.
And set, ready, and action. Alan Rust, did you get up nice and slow? Toss any weapons you might have. And no iteration.
Who is the person speaking? Whose voice are we hearing?
It sounds like Jensen Ackles.
And is he an actor?
He is an actor in Rust playing one of the lawmen, is my recollection.
Okay, thank you.
Stand up slowly and toss in guns. Okay, we're going to do it again. And set, and action. Harlan Rust, did you get up nice and slow? Toss any weapons you might have. There ain't no iteration you walking out of this church lesson. You stand up slowly and toss them guns. Okay, and set. Put it up. Okay, so
There's the answer to your question. That's the answer to your question earlier, that sound.
Why don't you explain to us what we're seeing?
So what you just saw for a brief moment was one of the effects department people coming in to spray at what we'd call atmosphere. So dust or whatever I don't know what's in their spray can, but that is what that sound was. And that's what they were doing, was adding atmosphere that makes it look a little foggy. And if hard light comes through those windows, you would kind of see those lights, the rays of light in that fog.
And I just backed this video up to 1 minute 6 seconds so that I can ask you the position that Mr. Baldwin is sitting in this video. Is that the same or similar position that he was in the blocking scene after lunch?
Yes, similar.
Okay.
and see me open my eyes, or they don't want? I mean, like, let's say I'm down here like this, and when he says Harlan Rust, I'm gonna go, boop.
Okay.
And you gotta come down here for that.
Yeah.
Anyway, we'll see if we can do that. Ready? Here we go.
Do you want
on another take, I mean. Here we go. Ready?
All right, another take. Where are we? And set. Ready? And action. Harlan Rust. Did you get up nice and slow? Toss any guns you have. Now, in no iteration you walking out of this church lesson, you stand up slowly and toss some weapons. Rust. All right, let's flip the sensor.
Can we try this?
So let me ask you, just so that we get an idea, where we see Mr. Baldwin sitting in the church pew, where is the door to the church?
Behind the camera.
From Mr. Baldwin's perspective, is it in front of him?
In front of Mr. Baldwin, yes.
And where is Mr. Ackles, the gentleman who is speaking in the scene?
It sounds as though he's just to the left of the camera.
So where would that be in relation to the door?
Jensen would be in between Mr. Baldwin and the door.
Okay, and if you can estimate how many feet, how big is this room, and how many feet are there from where Mr. Baldwin is sitting to the door?
In that instance, because we had moved the pews around a little, so in that instance, Mr. Baldwin's less than 20 feet from the door would be my guesstimation.
Okay, and who's this gentleman here that we can see in the video?
That is Dave Halls.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and finish it just for completeness, and then we'll move on to our next one. All right. I am now going to play what will be marked as State's Exhibit 112A. I would ask the court to go ahead and admit 112A and give permission to publish.
No objection, Your Honor.
All right, 112A is admitted. You may publish.
Okay. Mark. And set, ready, and action. Harlan Rust. Did you stand up nice and slow? Toss any weapons you have.
Again, ready?
Little too what? And set, ready, and action. Harlan Rust. Did you get up nice and slow? Toss any weapons you have.
One more. You good? Ready?
Set, ready, and action. Harlan Rust. Did you get up nice and slow, toss any weapons you have? Well, how close can I get right there? Joe, the only way to give you that line till he lands, till camera lands. Yeah.
Yep.
7 minutes, one.
Yeah.
Draw your gun and look up and point your gun, okay?
Okay, which way? Camera right or left?
This side of the camera for now.
So camera left for now.
I'll stand right here for you, Alex.
So whip it out.
Yeah.
Okay, well, let me get this all greased. Ready?
Yeah.
Okay, ready? Okay, ready? Ready.
And set, ready, and action. Harlan Rust. Do one more just like that. You got one more? Yeah.
Ready?
And set, ready, and action. Harlan Rust.
Okay. So the blocking, you can take these. Thank you, Shad. The blocking that you were describing, as a person who was working in the room, were you expecting Mr. Baldwin to pull the gun all the way out? Like what we just saw in those clips?
In the blocking of the ECU,
What's the ECU?
extreme close-up,
Okay.
I was not.
Okay.
My
Go ahead.
my understanding was it was just to kind of reveal that weapon coming out of the holster to the camera.
So I think that we may have ended your description of what was going on in the after lunch session where Mr. Souza was standing. And were there other people in the church also?
Yes.
Do you know approximately how many people were in there?
Myself, Reed, the camera operator, Zach, the boom guy was.
When you say the boom guy, what is the boom?
Sorry, guys. The sound. The person holding the sound boom. So recording sound for the sound mixer was in the church. Joel was shoulder to shoulder, like I had described, looking at my monitor. I believe Mamie Mitchell was to his right. Wardrobe, a woman named Doran was in there, I think, looking over Mimi's shoulder at the monitor. Helena, Serge, my direct boss, Reese Price, who's the key grip, he's the head of the grip department, had just come in to work with Helena and Serge. Dave Halls, and maybe one of the effects guys, I recall, was kind of in and out, keeping an eye on things, because they had pre-rigged some of their effects stuff in the ceiling, again, in preparation for the big turnaround that we were about to do.
Okay.
So I didn't give you a number, but I think that works out to 12-ish.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. So keep walking us through it. What happens next?
So we, I guess Reed and I are trying to find the camera angle that Joel, the director, is happy with, that he feels will tell that piece of the story. I think, like I mentioned earlier, I believe Helena and Serge were discussing how to change the lighting for the turnaround. Reese, my boss, Reese Price, was in there. I think he had just brought in a bounce card, maybe for that insert, maybe for the next shot.
We don't know what a bounce card is.
Lighting apparatus. So he was going to use some of the light coming through one of the windows and potentially reflect that back towards Mr. Baldwin to help illuminate him. I think Joel the director, and Alec had some brief conversation back and forth about what the goal was for that shot, and I think Alec had drawn it once to kind of audition what he thought his action should be for Joel, and then he drew it again, and it went off. And, instantly, a firearm went off in a small wooden church. So the concussion, ears ringing, that moment of panic in everybody. I think the first person I made eye contact with was Helena, who was clearly injured by whatever that gunshot was, that noise we had just heard. And in fact, she was starting to go flush, and I think holding her right and then I think that Joel let out some sort of scream or made some noise that, to indicate he was also injured. And I think I just my attention went to Joel because he was the closest to me. I think I recall Reed and Serge moving Pew out of the way to help Helena get basically to lay Helena down and start tending to her, figure out what her injuries were, or injury. And I started attending to Joel. I think I yelled out that if you can't help us, get the fuck out of here. And someone called 911, and I do recall Mimi's voice in the distance talking to 911 and telling where we're at, and I tried to calm Joel down. We had a good rapport, so I just tried to calm him down and let him know that we were going to get through it, because I didn't know what else to do in that moment. And then soon after, the medic and the best boy electric came into the church.
And I'm going to stop you real quick. Mm-hmm. The medic, do you recall her name?
Her first name was Cher. I don't recall her last name.
Okay, and who was the other person you said? Best boy? The
best boy electric, Matt Hemmer, I believe was his last name. He was Serge's second in command, is what a best boy is. So the gaffer and the key grip each have a best boy, and then the rest of their department. And my understanding was Matt had some combat medical training, so he came in to assist the medic Cher, and I think
when right after the gun went off, do you recall seeing Ms. Gutierrez in the church?
I do not.
And did Mr. Baldwin stay in the church?
He sat down in that same pew, I think, in that moment when I yelled out that if you can't help us, you need to, get out of here. I think he sat down, and then at some point, I looked over and he was gone. So.
Okay. And in terms of your attention to Mr. Souza, what were you doing to him? Were you touching his body? What were you doing?
I was. So Joel was wearing kind of a thick hoodie, and I believe he had a t-shirt or a couple of shirts on underneath, so it was start to figure out where Joel had been injured. He was certainly at that point writhing in pain and concerned for himself, asking me how Helena was, and I think coming to the realization that he had been shot. So I was trying to find where he was wounded. So started pulling back his hoodie to reveal what appeared to be a circular wound in his right shoulder, and at that point, I think the Cher and Matt came in. They had gloved hands. I didn't, so I had some of his blood on my hands, and I think I helped them roll Joel over. One of them had trauma shears to cut his shirt off, and then I helped roll him over, and I was in a position to see that what appeared to be a bullet just under the skin, basically where his right shoulder blade was, and he was in a great deal of pain. And I think that Cher gave me some gauze to just put some pressure on the wound while they attended to Helena's injuries, which I gathered at that time were certainly much more severe. because of her proximity to the firearm.
And could you hear Ms. Hutchins? I know you indicated that Mr. Souza was kind of yelling out in pain. Did you hear anything from Ms. Hutchins?
If I did, it was just, the groaning and discomfort from being shot by a firearm. I don't remember anything verbal from Helena.
Okay. And at some point, did paramedics arrive?
Yes.
And if you know, at some point was Ms. Hutchins taken for medical care offset?
Yeah, thank you, sir. I stayed with Joel until they carried him out, and what I observed was they were trying to stabilize her. I heard them call for a lifeline, so they were trying to stabilize her to get her in a helicopter and get her to whatever ER they felt was appropriate.
And at some point in time, were you notified that Ms. Hutchins had passed?
Yes.
Mr. Adiego, when you heard the gunshot and you saw these people fall, did it occur to you in that moment that it was a live round, that there was a real bullet in that gun?
I don't, maybe not in that moment. I think it became clear when, like I mentioned, I rolled Joel over, helped roll Joel over to see what very much looked like a large caliber bullet just being barely held in by his skin.
Okay. And is this the first time in your life that you've ever seen a bullet?
No.
Okay, so you knew a bullet when you saw one?
Yes.
Okay. Did you ever see Ms. Gutierrez after the gunshot went off?
Not until today.
Okay. And I want to back up. The people the camera crew that walked off that morning, did you know those people?
As well as you can know anyone in 2 weeks, sure.
Based on your time on set and everything that you knew about what was going on that movie set, do you have any reason to believe that any of those people planted live ammunition on set?
Judge, I'm going to object to speculation, lack of foundation, and whether he knows anyone.
Well, I think he can answer the question whether he has any reason to believe that they did or not.
Counsel approach.
Sir, do you recall the question?
I don't.
Do you have any reason to believe that live ammunition was planted by disgruntled crew members who left that morning?
I do not.
And based on everything that you heard when you were in the church after lunch, do you have any understanding of who the person was that loaded that gun?
Yes.
Who is the person that you believe loaded the gun?
The armor.
And who's that person?
Hannah Gutierrez Reed.
And do you see her sitting in court today?
I have seen her. She's behind you, yes.
Okay. And just for the record, can you point out what Ms. Gutierrez is wearing?
Gray blazer with a black collar, hair in a ponytail.
Will the record reflect that the defendant has been identified?
Yes.
At any point in time when you were in the church after lunch, did you hear anyone tell Ms. Gutierrez to leave the church?
No.
I'll pass the witness.
Cross-exam.
Thank you, Your Honor. Sir, when you started your testimony, early on in your testimony, you talked about being on 12 prior movies with armor or something like that. Recall that?
Yes.
And you talked about you're used to seeing ex-cops, ex-military. Remember that?
Yes.
As the armor, were those all males?
I can't give you a definitive on that. I think there may have been a female or two, female armor that I worked with in the past.
But you just didn't, you weren't used to seeing a young 24-year-old armor, were you? A female.
I wasn't used to seeing a young 24-year-old armor.
And a female.
That doesn't play into it for me. So whether male or female doesn't really matter in that case.
Okay, and I want to get into another, and we'll work through these topics, but you've talked a lot about things that you think Ms. Gutierrez Reed did. One of the things you didn't tell the jury is that you've sued Rust Production and Alec Baldwin, haven't you?
I have.
You what?
Yes.
You have a pending lawsuit right now, don't you?
As far as I know, it's pending, yes, sir.
And your attorney's in the courtroom?
He is indeed.
Been watching your testimony?
Clearly.
See how you do?
You'd have to ask him, sir.
Okay. And you've sued Alec Baldwin and Rust Production, but you have not sued Hannah Gutierrez Reed, have you?
Again, you'd have to talk to my counsel about who I've actually sued.
Have you read the lawsuit?
I perused it.
You perused it. What does that mean? Did you read it, all the paragraphs, or did you just read page 1 and just said, knock yourself out, lawyer, go ahead?
I think I got past page 1, but since I'm not in your industry, I don't understand what a lot of that is, and I trust my counsel to represent me.
It seems like you were making a lot of opinions earlier on what armors do. You filed a lawsuit. It seems like you could have read your lawsuit, right?
Objection, relevance to whether or not he read his lawsuit?
Well, I want to ask if he's read these paragraphs, because he has a totally different story in his lawsuit that he did today. So I want to ask him if he's read and adopted this lawsuit.
And I think he's already answered that.
Did you approve your lawsuit being filed?
I must have.
Because it was filed. Right?
Sorry.
Okay. And in that lawsuit, you're suing for a variety of things, punitive damages, right?
Again, I'm not a lawyer, sir, so you'd have to discuss that with my counsel.
Well, you know you're suing for loss of enjoyment of life.
Certainly.
Okay? And you know you're suing for medical expenses and non-medical expenses, right?
I understood that to be the case, yes.
So out of this tragedy, you claim that you have a blast injury, right?
I believe that's in the documents you're referring to, yes, sir.
Did you go to the doctor for a blast injury?
I have talked to my physician about what happened that day, yes.
You've talked to your physician. What, did they do any tests? Did they take any x-rays? Did you just tell him I was in this and what?
I described the incident and he did what he felt was appropriate.
What was that?
I'm not going to discuss my medical treatment with you, sir.
Okay. Well, so you're, in any event, you're suing Rust Production and Alec Baldwin, right?
Yes.
And you're here telling this jury all about Ms. Gutierrez Reed, but in your lawsuit, you talk about defendants, Rust Production and Alec Baldwin, cut corners and cut costs, and it endangered the cast and crew. So you believe that, right? Rust Production?
I do.
And you believe that their hiring of Gabrielle Pickle and Roe Walters to manage the budget was not a good idea because they have cost-cutting problems on prior sets? You believe that?
Correct.
Okay. And you also believe that David Halls had prior safety issues, correct?
Yes.
On a prior set, he didn't manage that safely, did he?
That was my understanding.
Okay. You also believe, you knew that Ms. Gutierrez Reed had asked for more training days as an armorer. You knew that.
I don't...
In the form of a question, there needs to be a question. It sounds like a statement.
Overruled.
Okay. You're aware that Ms. Gutierrez Reed asked Gabrielle Pickle for more time as an armorer, more training days and more armorer days. You're aware of that?
I became aware of that after 2 people were shot. Yes, sir.
Okay, well it's in your lawsuit. It's part of your lawsuit.
Okay.
Okay. So let me ask you this. Are you hoping that you can come in and testify here today and something happens to Ms. Gutierrez Reed, it'll help your lawsuit?
I'm hoping for justice, sir.
For
2
yourself.
people were injured on a film set. That has not only affected me, that has affected the film industry.
And you want money for that?
I want justice.
You want money? Your lawsuit doesn't say justice, it says money.
Again,
it says
you'd
you're
have
suing
to...
for money. Isn't that correct?
Mr. Bowles needs to let the witness answer the question. That he's being argumentative. This needs to be a cross.
You are being argumentative.
I'll let him answer. I agree. You're suing for money.
I asked my lawyer to help bring justice in this case. And if that doesn't mean criminal, then I would assume that means some sort of monetary justice.
Yes. Okay. Now, you also understood that Mr. Halls did not post the safety bulletins onto any of the call sheets. Correct?
I understood that production did not furnish us with safety bulletins, sir.
Okay, so production. So that may not have been Mr. Halls. It may have been somebody else in production.
Again, production is all-encompassing of Mr. Halls and the other ADs that would generate that information.
And you also indicate that Mr. Halls was the overall safety coordinator on set, correct?
That's typically one of the many jobs of the first assistant director, yes, sir.
And so it's his responsibility to convene the safety meetings you testified to, right?
Typically it is, yes.
And in this particular set, he did not do that on every day of the filming, did he?
Not to my recollection.
And in fact, the day that this, you described it as the camera crew walked off the day of the shooting incident. You described it as more chaotic than it had been. And that day, there was no safety meeting convened by Mr. Halls, was there?
Not that I was invited to.
Okay. You've indicated that Mr. Baldwin didn't follow gun safety rules. You believe that, right?
I do.
And you believe that Ms. Gutierrez Reed was operating in 2 jobs in props and armor, and you thought that was dangerous, that production did that, didn't you?
I did.
And you felt it was dangerous and part of your lawsuit that they should not have put her in those 2 positions. Isn't that correct?
That's correct.
And in fact, sir, you've never been on all of your 12 prior movies with armors, you've never been on a set where an armorer was part-time, right?
I don't recall ever working on a set that had a part-time armorer, no, sir.
Okay. So this would be your first one on the Rust set where they had part-time?
Potentially.
Okay. And in fact, because it's in your suit, you thought that was a terrible idea, right?
If it says so in the suit, then I must have said that, yes.
Okay. And this was a gun-heavy set with guns operating on 17 of the 21 scheduled film days, yet you knew that they weren't paying Ms. Gutierrez Reed for more than 8 armor days, right?
I had no idea what they were paying Miss Gutierrez.
Were you aware that whether her armor days had run out by the time of the shooting incident?
I was not privy to that information, sir.
Okay. And you're probably not also privy to the fact that she was regularly performing props duties as part of her daily duties on the set. Were you aware of that? Did you see her doing those prop duties?
I believe that it was noted on the call sheet that she had more than one responsibility.
Mm-hmm. Did you ever see her, for example, rolling cowboy cigarettes, having her do jobs like that in her props duties?
Can't say that I did.
So you didn't see her all the time then?
No, because my job takes a lot of focus, and I have essentially 5 bosses at any given moment, so I have to focus on my tasks at hand.
Well, that's what you said also, that you didn't see who was in the church, or you didn't see what was happening because you have to focus on your job. You have to focus on your camera and what you're doing with that, right? So you're not always seeing everything else around you.
I'm not necessarily seeing, but I'm trying to watch and listen to everything that I can on set.
Let me ask you about that, listening to everything. You talked about what the negligent discharge by Sarah Zachary, nothing being called out in terms of a gun being operated. Do you recall that testimony?
I do.
Now, what radio channel were you using on set, would you regularly use?
I'm a grip, so I'm always on Channel 8, sir.
Channel 8. And do you understand, or did you understand that the armor operates on Channel 1, and that's when that's called out on Channel 1 and it goes to David Halls? Did you know that?
If it only goes to Channel 1 and Dave Halls, then somebody's failed at their job, because their job is to let everybody know what's going on with firearms and ammunition on set.
And were you aware then, sir, before you gave your testimony to the jury, that responsibility is Mr. Halls then to call out, we're going to have a gun scene? Were you aware of that?
I'm aware of what Mr. Halls' responsibilities are, certainly.
Okay, well then, why didn't you say that earlier? That when this was called out, you may have been on the wrong channel. Maybe Mr. Halls didn't call it out. Did you not know that?
I don't understand your question. I wasn't on the wrong channel. I'm on Channel 8, where I'm supposed to be, sir.
Okay, well then, the failure was not Miss Gutierrez Reed's, which you wanted to imply to the jury. It was Mr. Halls, wasn't it?
Miss Gutierrez Reed loaded a firearm that killed my friend and injured a director.
I'm not talking about the incident. I'm talking about the negligent discharge with Sarah Zachary. We're talking about that incident. Now, first of all, you have no idea who loaded that weapon that Miss Zachary negligently discharged, do you?
I wasn't there when the weapon was loaded, so no.
Okay. And you have no idea, but you said earlier you don't even know if there was a bullet in it.
I saw a bullet in Joel Souza's shoulder.
I'm not talking about that. I know you want to keep coming back to it for your lawsuit, but I'm talking about Sarah Zachary's negligent discharge.
I have to object to Mr. Bowles' tone, indicating that this...
Please, no commentary.
Yes, I
All
won't,
right.
Your Honor.
All right,
I won't.
thank you.
So, with regard to Sarah Zachary's negligent discharge, you have no idea whether it was a blank, whether it was a live round. You just don't know.
Correct.
Okay. Now, you talk a lot throughout your testimony about all these failures you find in Miss Gutierrez Reed, yet in your lawsuit, it's all about production of Mr. Baldwin. Can you explain that? Why you talk about production of Mr. Baldwin in your lawsuit and not Miss Gutierrez Reed?
I would refer you to my counsel, sir.
It'll be called
I didn't write that lawsuit, so
Okay.
I would refer you to my counsel for those questions.
You went after the people with money for the lawsuit, right? And
I went after production, the people responsible for hiring the people that killed and shot someone on a film set.
And you, as part of that, talk about that the decision to hire Ms. Gutierrez Reed was motivated by production's desire to have a quick and cheap production. That was part of their desire to hire a cheaper position in that role, make her do 2 jobs, right?
Apparently that's what it says. That's what it says.
Okay. And you indicated that this was constantly rushed and reckless and chaotic on set, correct?
Correct.
And you heard Mr. Baldwin a couple of times at least rushing people and telling them to move, 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 right?
I did.
Okay. Did you hear Mr. Halls do that also?
I did.
Did you ever stand up to Mr. Baldwin and say, no, we're not going to move this fast?
That's not my job, sir.
Okay. And did you ever see anybody else stand up to Mr. Baldwin, tell him not to move that fast?
I don't recall anybody standing up to Mr. Baldwin on the set of Rust, sir.
Wasn't going to happen, was it?
Objection to the form of question calls for speculation.
You never saw anybody.
Restate the question.
Yes, Your Honor. You were aware, based on your seeing Mr. Baldwin, how he interacted with everybody, it was your perception nobody was going to stand up to him, wasn't it?
Correct.
Yeah. Because he's running the show. He's the big boss, right?
He's the producer, one of the writers, and on the call sheet he's number 1. So yes.
So wouldn't you find it difficult for a 24-year-old female armor in her, as you call it, her second movie, with everybody else, grown men, not standing up to Mr. Baldwin? Wouldn't you find that difficult for her also?
I wasn't in her position.
Now, you also talk about the IATSE armor. You knew that Ms. Gutierrez Reed was not yet in the union.
Actually, my understanding was it was a union show and the crew was union.
But you didn't know whether she was not union. She's not union. You didn't know that.
Mr. Bowles is testifying, Your Honor.
I'm asking if he's aware.
No.
But
You
he's
are
not.
testifying. You said she's not in the union. Okay, that's your testimony.
Well, I'm
So
asking-
ask it as a question rather than testifying.
Yes. Were you aware that Ms. Gutierrez Reed is not union?
I was under the impression that we were doing a union movie. Everybody on the crew was union. I didn't learn that she was not yet in the union until after.
So you did learn that after.
Correct.
Okay. And you know from your experience in over 100 credits and being on a movie, having the union behind you makes it likely that you can stand up. I mean, in other words, if there's a safety issue and you have your union behind you, you can raise that because you've got the union.
On a union movie, any crew member has the support of a union, whether they're union or not. They are represented by IATSE.
Well, could you have stopped the whole production if you wanted to, if you saw all these safety issues?
I certainly could have voiced my opinion. Whether or not they would have honored that and stopped anything, I cannot say.
Okay, so you did say on the negligent discharges, you went to Mr. Halls and you told him you were concerned, and you told him you're concerned about safety. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And you also told his second AD, Ann. You told both of them, right?
Ann was his second, just to be clear. But yes, I did
Second.
mention it to Ann as well, that I was concerned and that this needed to be on the daily production report, knowing that the other producers typically read the production reports, as would the insurance company or whoever's bonding the film.
Okay, and you didn't see anybody do anything after you made those complaints?
I wouldn't necessarily see anybody do anything. because they would potentially be on Channel 1 having that conversation amongst themselves.
Well, did you see anything happen, like additional training, any kind of actions taken by Mr. Halls that you saw?
I didn't see anything change.
Okay. So the day of the incident, the day of the shooting, you indicated to Miss Morrissey on direct that you didn't see Miss Gutierrez read in the church, but you didn't have concerns or words to that effect, that after the firearm had come into the church, you didn't have concerns, because I think you testified the armor would check that. Is that what you said?
I believe that misstates the testimony.
Well, tell me what you said. I may have misheard it. Tell me what you said.
I don't know what you're getting at. I don't know what you want me to restate, sir.
Let me ask you, you didn't see Miss Gutierrez read in the church?
I only heard her in the church.
Did you look around and after you heard her to see if you could see her in the church?
No.
Okay. So did you see if anybody else, Sarah Zachary from props, was in the church?
I think we've already covered this, and no, I don't recall anybody from the props department seeing anybody from the props department in the church.
Okay. Now, Sarah Zachary, I want to talk about her for a minute. You knew, or were you aware that she would load firearms too at times?
I became aware when she had a negligent discharge on set.
Okay. Did you also ever see her loading firearms on set?
I don't recall beyond that incident her really dealing with firearms, if at all.
You know that Sarah Zachary was Hannah Gutierrez Reed's boss?
I do.
As props master? Mm-hmm. Okay. And now earlier you talked about your understanding of armor, but isn't it true that props department is in charge of the ammunition? Those are props.
That's my understanding of how the props department works, sure.
Okay. So when you said earlier that the guns and ammo would be the armor, in reality, the ammunition falls under the props department. It's a prop.
My understanding is live ammunition is absolutely the armorer's responsibility. Any other ammunition that may be used in belts or bandoliers or strewn about on set falls under props.
Well, live ammunition is never supposed to be on the set.
When I say live ammunition, I'm referring to blanks. Okay. Something that can go bang and hurt someone.
Okay, so let's be clear. You're not. A blank is not a round with a projectile. It's not a real bullet. It's a blank that shoots powder, right? Go ahead. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
My understanding of blanks are, it looks very much like a real bullet. They're crimped differently at the end, so they don't actually contain a bullet. But beyond that, I don't know that I would, I don't know if they're marked in any other way other than seeing the ends crimped.
Okay. And you've never been in armor yourself?
I've never been in the props department at all, no.
Or the props department. So when you make opinions about what you think, you really have no idea because you've never served in that role. It's just what you've seen over other movies?
It's what I've learned in almost 30 years in the film industry, yes.
Okay. Now, when you talked about guns being left out on the cart, I want to ask your experience in prior movies. Have you seen carts that are professional looking that can be locked up, that an armor can use to lock up those weapons on it?
Yes, and I believe I described that earlier.
Okay. And this cart in this set was not like that.
I believe it was just kind of a more of what I would be accustomed to seeing craft services use, like an open gray plastic cart.
And were you aware that it took over a week for the props department even to get that cart?
I'm not in the props department. I'm not really aware of what they do.
Okay.
In that sense.
So this cart that they had on set that they were supposed to use for their firearms, on this Rust set, it wouldn't lock. It was more like something you would see in the crafts department. So And production provides that, right?
Again, I don't know what the props department brought or what they were provided. A lot of us rent the production companies our appropriate gear. Some of that may be carts, some of that may be tools.
Okay, so you don't know.
No.
You also don't know if the firearms that you said were laying out from time to time on the cart were real firearms or were plastic, were replica. You don't know that for sure.
I can tell you that the firearms certainly looked real as they would reflect the sunlight. They were certainly metal firearms. Whether they were actual firing gun, there may have been a long gun or two that had some sort of sock or some soft covering on them, sure.
And the handguns had the socks too. You never saw those?
I don't recall seeing the handguns in any kind of container, sir.
Okay. Did you ever hear Hannah call out the load amounts? You testified earlier you didn't, but you weren't always around those scenes when Hannah Gutierrez Reed was dealing with the firearms, were you?
I was on set 95% or more of the time, so there may have been an instance where she called out whatever power that plank load would have been, and I missed it.
And again, if she's calling it out on Channel 1, and Mr. Halls is supposed to then communicate that, and you're on another channel, she may have called it out and you didn't hear it.
Well, the protocols on set typically is the armorer would call that out verbally. What she does on her radio, I don't know. I'm not on that channel. And then the first assistant director would parrot that and let us all know to make sure there was redundancy and that we heard it was hot or cold.
And sir, are you sitting now under oath telling this jury that Hannah never called out the loads that were used on that set? Are you going to tell them that under oath, that you never heard that?
Objection, Your Honor. That has not been his testimony, and he's already answered this question.
It's been asked and answered.
So other than reporting to Mr. Halls and the second, did you ever report this to anybody else if you were so concerned about it? Did you report it to Gabrielle Pickle? Did you report it to anybody else? Did you report it to Joel Souza?
I believe that Joel Souza and Helena, before she was killed, had a conversation about some of the safety issues,
that was my
payroll issues, and I did notify Local 80, which was the union that represented me while I was making that movie.
When did you notify Local 80?
You'd have to contact Local 80. It was early in the movie, and I can't give you a definitive date, sir.
Well, no, I'm asking you. I'm not going to contact Local 80. They're not here in court.
He's already indicated he doesn't remember.
Judge, can I do my cross-examination?
Well, if you do it properly, you can.
I'm doing it properly.
Listen. Ask the question about the date. He said he didn't remember, and then you started to tell him you weren't going to ask that person and that he was going to tell you in so many words, okay?
Yes.
So let's not be argumentative. Let's just ask him. You can ask him one more time.
So do you have any idea what date you may have contacted Local 80?
I believe it was in the first week of production.
Okay. So the first week of production was before any accidental discharges would have happened.
That doesn't mean I wasn't concerned about safety.
And I understand, and my question was not that. I understand you were concerned. My question was, that was before any of the accidental discharges.
I don't recall exactly if that was before or after, but once I contact Local 80, that doesn't mean I stopped talking to Local 80 throughout production. So I think we had more than one conversation about it.
Because you're contacting Local 80, did they do anything about it?
My understanding was they contacted the New Mexico local, which is 480, and a representative from 480 showed up, and possibly a representative from the camera union, Local 600, also showed up.
What happened at that point? Did they do anything?
They have conversations that I'm not part of, sir. Yeah.
Ultimately, the camera crew was disgruntled, and they walked off the day before the shooting. Part of that was their hotel situation. You were aware of that, weren't you?
I don't know about disgruntled, but I know that they were promised hotels or housing, and those promises never came to fruition.
Okay. And so they left, and the next day when there had to be a new camera crew, they had to get some more people. You were aware Video Village was down?
I was not.
You didn't know Video Village was down at all?
Asked and answered, Your Honor.
Council approach.
Sir, you said earlier Baldwin always wanted to use his hero props, or words to that effect. Do you recall that?
Yes.
And by that you meant he wanted to use the real, for example, the real revolver?
That was my understanding of his the way he liked to perform. Yes, sir.
Okay. And would that also include, sir, the knife, those kind of? Is that what you're meaning by hero props?
My recollection is Mr. Baldwin always wanted to be ready to call rolling when he was ready. So hero props in his wardrobe, essentially ready to go.
Okay. And everybody else had to be ready to go when he was ready?
Yes.
Okay. So that, sir, it was your understanding, you may have said this, and I just want to go back over it, but that Mr. Baldwin did not, that scene or that rehearsal did not require the draw. Was that your understanding?
My understanding was it was really just the initiation of that movement was the part of the story that Joel Souza wanted to tell.
Okay. And I think you called it an extreme close-up shot of his hand.
Correct.
Coming out, okay. So it would be coming out of his holster, and there would be an extreme close-up on that.
Correct. The frame would have been essentially his right hand going into his coat to draw his firearm.
Okay, sir. Okay, Your Honor, may I have just a moment? Yeah.
Your Honor, that's all the questions we have.
Redirect.
Mr. Audiego, if you are aware, are you the only person suing Mr. Baldwin and Rust Productions?
Not from my understanding.
There are others, correct?
Correct.
And Mr. Bowles asked you in your lawsuit, you claimed that you have lost enjoyment of your life as a result of the incident. Is that correct?
Yes, it is absolutely correct.
Just to be clear, did you receive a subpoena for your testimony today?
I believe that my counsel received a subpoena from both sides for today, yes.
Do you know, sir, did anyone force Ms. Gutierrez to accept a job as an armorer and props assistant?
Force her? Not that I'm aware of, no.
Do you know if anyone forced Ms. Gutierrez to continue working on the set of Rust when things were chaotic and difficult?
Not to my knowledge, no.
Is Mr. Baldwin on trial today?
It appears that he is a bit, yes.
I'm asking you, is this the trial of Mr. Baldwin?
No, it's not.
Is this the trial of Rust Productions?
No, it's not.
Is Mr. Halls on trial today?
He is not.
On October 21st, 2021, did Ms. Gutierrez show the dummy rounds to the cast and crew as you have indicated is proper safety protocol for armorers?
Not when I was on set, no.
Did Ms. Gutierrez shake the dummy rounds for the cast and crew?
Not when I was on set, no.
If Ms. Gutierrez had shown the dummy rounds to the cast and crew, what do you think would have happened?
Your Honor,
We-
object to speculation.
If he has an opinion, if he knows based upon his personal knowledge.
In your opinion, working on this movie set with Ms. Gutierrez and working on other movie sets with other armorers, if she had taken the dummies, rattled them, showed them to the cast and crew, do you think that live round would have been discovered?
No.
You don't?
Oh, pardon me. Had we looked at all of the ammo, we would have known whether it was dummies or live.
Who made the decision not to show the cast and crew the dummy rounds prior to handing the gun to anyone in the church?
I would guess the armor or...
Again, he's just guessing.
He
He
is.
said he would guess.
All right, that's his answer. He guessed, so we'll strike it. Okay? He guessed.
Is it your understanding that Ms. Gutierrez loaded that gun?
It is.
Sorry, did you all hear me because my mic was off? Yes, you're all saying yes. Okay.
In your opinion, would Ms. Hutchins be alive today if Ms. Gutierrez had not put a live round in the gun?
Your Honor, again, I'm going to check.
I'm going to strike that. He didn't get an answer, so.
All right. Who is the person on the set of a movie who is in charge of firearms?
Asked and answered.
Sustained.
Do you know why your civil lawsuit doesn't include Ms. Gutierrez?
You'd have to refer to my counsel for that answer. I don't know.
Have you testified today in order to further your civil lawsuit?
I've testified today to bring justice for the death of my friend.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Nothing further.
All right, you're excused. Thank you, sir. All right, we're going to break for the evening. Follow the bailiff directions. Please don't talk among yourselves or anyone else about the evidence received here in court. Don't read anything about production, this case. Don't look anything up. Don't do any research. Thank you. Where were you going to, Brian, did you have them in a different location in the morning?
No.
Okay. All right, so downstairs 8:30, okay? Thank you.